Hello and welcome to Cruising and Musing episode. I guess this makes it number 2. I am your host Rob, and we are rolling around Lehigh today in the Studio A, aka the 79 Continental. Came out this way, was supposed to listen to a board member speak, but that got canceled, so I'll have to come out and ambush them with my questions next time. What was on my mind to talk to them about was teacher pay. And teacher pay is something I've mentioned before about, it's 6 up, half a dozen down. It's not everything that people outside of the profession think it is, but it's also, not as bad as some people make it out to be. If you're a teacher and you got to work 3 jobs to make ends meet, you're doing something wrong. That's not you being a teacher, that's you being bad with money. But at the same time, teachers are undercompensated in comparison to people with similar levels of education and degrees. Come on, go ahead. Someone forgot their traffic rules. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get into that. As I previously mentioned, we had a raise for new teachers from Governor DeSantis down here. And Governor DeSantis gave them roughly $8,000 pay increase over what they were making previously. And, you can't complain about that. So they got basically 22% pay increase over what they were making as a starting wage. And the rest of us were guaranteed to get at least a 2% increase if we didn't get an increase by being raised up to that, because they raised the new teachers up to about what a 7-year teacher was making in most cases. I was just a little bit past that, so I was supposed to get a quote-unquote raise, but I kind of ended up breaking even on a $200 or so raise for the bit. Now, obviously in fairness, what they should have done was, given everybody a in-like raise. Instead of paying new teachers 22% more, if they just raised the pay for everybody by 10% across the board, then you're recognizing years in, valued contribution, teacher appreciation. They did that, gave all those new teachers that pay raise, and all those, veteran teachers, 20 years in the field, 15 years in the field, COVID rolled around, they've already taken one slap in the face. Then they were like, oh, you think I'm going to go in and work for you now when I might get sick and die from it? Because you're talking, teachers in that high-risk category, over 50, teaching is not kind to the waist. You're, eating what you can when you can, and let's just face it, it's a rather not exactly good exercise being a teacher. You're very sedate as an occupation. So you had a bunch of overweight, middle-aged teachers all say, well, you know what, fuck this, I'm retiring early. And they checked out. I really got to work on the swearing on these. But we don't advertise it as kid-friendly. So you had a large number of teachers walk off the job, teacher shortage getting worse. It's gotten worse again this year. It's so bad that they are trying to use scheduling voodoo, cutting the kids down from having 8 classes to 7 throughout the course of the year to eliminate 150 teacher positions for next year, because they're short by 135 teachers and they're anticipating more retirements this year. So those kinds of shenanigans are going on. Now there's 2 main things that I hear when teachers complain about not getting paid enough. And number 1, there's 3 things. Number 1 is tenure, but we had a little rant about that, about how tenure doesn't exist in Florida anymore, and how tenure never meant you couldn't get fired in the first place. It just meant that the administrator had to do their due diligence. Tenure protected you from being fired without cause, not from being fired with cause. Then the second thing you always hear is, well, teachers get paid for the summer. No, we don't. Just like when you get your tax return checks, if you get one, instead of another bill, if you get a tax return check, The government's not giving you that money. That's money you've given the government, and they're now giving it back to you after you made them an interest-free loan. When I get my big paycheck going into summer that's supposed to get me through the summer, what they have done is they have given me no choice in the matter. They have decided that I'm not smart enough as a college-educated grown adult to manage my money and hold my money through the summer. Pay my bills and everything so that I can make ends meet. So what they do is instead they hold your money without giving you the option to go ahead and collect it. They keep it all in a gigantic fund that they collect interest on, and then they give it back to you at the end of the school year, and that's how teachers get their money for summer. They either take the lump sum or they just say, hey, just give me my paychecks through the summer. And does the district love it when you take that option, because now they can keep your money collecting interest for them even longer. It's all a scheme, it's all a gimmick, but teachers at the end of the day do not get paid for the summer. They don't work. The only way you get paid for summer is if you work summer school. And there's always something going on with that, where it's, part-time only work or what have you. So, for example, myself, I normally work summer school because, I kind of need the extra cash, being a single-income household. But, not this year. They're asking me to do what constitutes to be a full week's work, 40 hours a week, in return for 20 hours of compensated pay. And I don't need the money that badly this time around. I'm not doing it. It is what it is. But that's an example of another place where they get teachers, where they offer them compensation for doing extra little bits of work. But the extra little bits of work, while they're being compensated for it, what's being offered isn't enough to make it really worth the teacher's while if they know what they're getting into, or it'll be, underneath. They're not paying them their hourly rate. Example of this is I was offered $400 to do science fair for our kids for the year. $400 sounds like a nice lump of change, not something to say no to, until you take into the fact that they're going to take that $400 and they're going to spread it across all of your paychecks. So you're not going to see that $400 all at once. And what you're actually signing up for is about 40 hours worth of work at the end of the day. So now you're not only not seeing the money all at once, but now you're only getting compensated $10 an hour when your hourly rate is going to be closer to $30, even if you're a new teacher. So they're offering you a third of the money for your time. And they will constantly pressure you to take those positions. And you can have things such as being voluntold that you're taking that position if you want to keep your position, because without tenure also went away professional contracts that self-renew. So any teacher hired after 2011 down here is constantly in the position of, is this going to be the thing I tell the boss no when they're asking me to do extra, that's going to determine whether or not I get to keep my job. And things get watered down, like I said, because what they offer you is never enough to cover the hours in, not at your full pay rate. And then lots of times what you're getting asked to do won't even be paid. Second part of it, so we covered, that teachers don't get the tenure, that teachers don't get paid, their full hourly wage when given extras, that teachers, what was I just talking about? All right, what have you. The last point to make is that teachers seldom get paid. When we walk in and we sign on the dotted line and we, are accepting the job offer, you walk in, you sit down, and you are shown a salary schedule which your compensation is supposed to follow. You walk in, you sit down, they say, okay, you're going to make this much 1 year in, you're going to make this much 3 years in, you're going to make this much at year 5, this much at year 7, this much at year 12, at this and this year you unlock these extra benefits, and sign here please, and now you're going to work for us. And that's what teachers sign up for. That's what they sign on the dotted line and volunteer for. But what they get instead is, on year 3, you enter 3 years of pay freeze where you don't even get a cost of living adjustment, and you make the same amount for 3 years without your raise that you're supposed to get, or you get held up on a step as they add a new requirement to go up that step, and things like that. If it was any other profession, it would be called a bait and switch, and there'd be a class action suit against the employer for what has gone on. Unfortunately, the school districts have exceptions to the different OSHA rules that allow them to work teachers, well past 40 hours without extra compensation or time and a half, or, redrawn of the contracts for further compensation for the extended hours, things like that. Those of you who are on salary, if you're working more than 5 hours over your salary pay on the regular, you are entitled to go to OSHA and report your employer for that. Salaried positions are meant to give some basic leeway back and forth. They're not meant to allow them to pay you for 40 hours and working for 50. But most people don't understand that when they're on salary, they can still report that sort of shit to OSHA, because you're due, if not for overtime, then for a higher level of compensation on your salary, with it written into your contract. The expectation is that you work 50 hours a week. Now, if your contract says you're expected to work 50 hours a week and you were dumb enough to sign that for the amount of money you signed, well then, that's what you signed up for, the same as the teachers. But going back to the teachers, what they signed for is often not what they're getting. Myself, if I had gotten what I had signed for, I'd be making probably, I think I did the math once, it'd be about $5,000 more a year, because I would have been getting that money, plus the performance pay money they brought in later. That performance pay money, where I jumped through every hoop to get that performance pay money, was told that it would be added as a bonus permanent on top of my base salary, where no matter what happened, that money would never go away. And it was thousands of dollars over the courses of the year. And when they jumped up the new teacher pay, it's why I was making slightly more than what they jumped new teacher pay up to, because I was ahead of my schedule for my pay stuff due to jumping all the extra hoops and doing all the extra work and having the high effectiveness and having the test scores and everything come back. All of that's gone now. It's like I'm not going to get any more pay out of that. It's now disappeared in part of my base pay now as part of my raise increase. So that was a lie. And that's a lot of what teachers, experience, is that they go in and what they agree to isn't what they get. And there's so many protections for the school district against, at least in places where the teachers union is weak, like down here in Florida, very weak teachers unions that may as well not exist. They're only really useful for negotiating the basic stuff. Anything that involves shenaniganry, they're useless at fighting against. So the shenaniganry that has me losing money they're useless. We'll leave it at that. Then another thing for me, in my own specific situation, was I had access to money that was a bonus that I was paid about $2,700 after taxes in November of each year for being what they called best and brightest. That being a qualification I earned through having very high SAT scores, above the 90th percentile, and being rated highly effective by evaluation. Extra $2,700. That's a month's pay after taxes that I was getting as a bonus. That's a big deal to me. They took that money away and rolled it into the funds that were being used to give the new teachers that 22% increase. Now, here's the thing. If everyone had gotten the 20% increase across the board, if you'd looked at what a 10-year teacher made in 2005 when I decided I was going into teaching, and I was a 10-year teacher now with that 20% increase, I would be making the same amount of money as that 10-year teacher did back in 2005, adjusted for inflation. So right now, without having that, I'm making basically 18% less than that teacher did in terms of buying power back when I graduated high school. My high school teachers, who I told I wanted to be a teacher, you failed me. You should have warned me about this. You should have told me about what went on and the shenanigans and the nonsense and all the BS that was going on with all of these problems. Nothing in college, nothing they tell you in teacher college, teacher school, when you go specifically to be a teacher, they talk about, well, it's a lot of bullshit about, the children, and if you ask them about what you're going to do if you work on the secondary schools, they'll be like, you'll just adapt. Biggest waste of money ever. I learned almost nothing. I had one or two good professors the entire time, and I learned more doing my student teaching internship and just simply going in and getting my hands dirty as a teacher than I ever did paying thousands of dollars to go to college. You want to fix your teacher shortage, let's fix the teacher certification path. There's no reason why it should have been more than 2 years. That being said, so teacher pay, we talked about teachers not having tenure, so, like the stuff you're supposed to get, a lot of those side benefits and job security that used to be there isn't there anymore. That was part of the reason to justify teachers getting a lower pay. Teachers do not get paid over the summer. Teachers will get coerced into doing extra work for less than their hourly rate, which waters down the overall wages and overall rate they're getting paid. Teachers do not get what they agree to when they sign on to be teachers to begin with. And now, finally, when we talk about teachers and teachers' compensation, comparative to other professions with similar qualifications and what have you. Oh boy, where to start on this one? So, I've got a couple of brothers. One of them makes $90,000 a year with the same amount of schooling I have, being a broker and banker. The other one, with the same amount of schooling I have, makes almost $400,000 a year in a CO position in a corporation. Now, we're going to leave the guy making the really big bucks out of this equation because he works sun up to sundown and did so for years and years and years to get to the position he's in. That guy paid his dues in a way I would never be willing to, so I don't begrudge him that at all. However, looking at the other brother that makes the 90 compared to my 50, he works about 32 hours a week. In fact, he has time for an entire second career doing something that he loves and enjoys and doesn't have to worry about the money being, real on what it is. And, as they always say, more money, more problems. But, if we paid teachers the way we paid bankers, and if you can think of something more useless than most bankers, by all means, we'll talk about that. But, you wouldn't have the teacher retention issues that you have. 90 grand, I shut up. All right, that is principal pay. That is vice principal pay. That is the kind of pay rate the administrators get. So you can make that kind of money in education, but by the time you're doing that, you are not a classroom teacher anymore. Or you're working up north and you've got 20, 30 years in, which is another thing that you have to keep in mind. When they talk about the average pay for a teacher being $67,000 a year, you'd be lucky to make that with 30 years in the system working in a Florida school. But that's also got to be, kind of where you would be at my 10 years in a northern school. So those averages are, not relative, because you have outliers. New York City teachers make an obscene amount of money. So if they can manage to live small in New York City, work for 20 years living small, or work for even 10 years living small, then move down here, they not only get the pay recognition of the 10 years they worked there and get increased on their steps on the transfer. Yeah, they're taking a pay cut, but now they're bringing all that extra money they were making down to a low expense area like this and buying those houses that somebody who worked the same amount of time here can't afford. And that is a literal strategy. I have talked to people where they have used it. I have coworkers who intentionally worked the first 10 years of their careers in northern areas than moved down here to have a family and raise children because they wanted to have the red state laws and red state taxes after collecting blue state pay that also went into their blue state pensions. And when they go to get their Social Security, they'll be collecting it the 3 highest years on those times they were teachers in those blue states. So it's a clever way to go about it. And again, if I had been properly cautioned and tutored, I may have tried the same thing. But we're talking Florida and we're talking compensation. Now, overall, relative to the rest of the wages in Lee County, I don't feel like I do that bad for myself. However, you have to manage your expectations as a teacher. Gone are the days. Gone are the days where a single income teacher is going to have a housewife and 2 kids. You are not going to support a family on your single teacher pay, or even on a single teacher's pay with someone working part-time. You're still going to have 2 grown adults working full-time to support 2 kids on a teacher's pay if you're going to try to live a middle-class lifestyle. I don't really go into that, despite the fact that I do have some nice things. I support only myself, and I've spent the last 10 years living like a college student when I wasn't renting a room and, squeezing every penny tightly. Then I was, owning my own house and renting out rooms to others. It simply is what it is. You get creative when you are a single income on teacher pay to make sure that everything gets covered. But that, goes back to my background. I was raised poor, spent my entire time in high school. We lived in a trailer. My mother never made more than $11 an hour when she was working as a skilled laborer, and, probably never made more than $25,000 a year. And she managed to raise 2 boys on that, plus the various husbands that she had that were sometimes employed, sometimes not employed, and usually cost more to have around than they brought in. Now, the expectation, the idea that, so like I said, it's about managing your expectations as a teacher. If your expectation is that you're going to be a career professional and make enough money to raise a family on your own, this ain't it. If you think that you're going to have a family of 2 teachers raising a family on your own, definitely you can pull that off out of 2 teachers living together on their pay salary. You can afford your average price house, and you can live a lower middle income lifestyle. You're not going to do it on 1 teacher's pay. As a solo teacher's pay, I maintain a lifestyle that I would call upper working class. And while that's all I've ever really wanted, it would be nice to have more breathing room. That being said, again, when you compare it to being able to make $90,000 with the same amount of school on a degree that was easier to get, no less, something's a little off. When you compare that to if I was adjusted for inflation, I'd be making $60,000 a year compared to when I first, started going to college to teach. I would be sitting much happier, much prettier on everything. So, we've kind of got this thing going where we're spending more money than ever on students, but that money is not going down to the teachers and their pay, nor is the pensions for the retired teachers bankrupting anyone. The money is not going to teachers past, present, or future. It's not going to your children either. The money that the state pays, down here it's $8,000 per student. In other places it's more thousands per student. But that money isn't going to your child, nor is it going to the teachers. It's going to the same place that the inflated college tuitions are going. There's extra administrative costs that are getting compounded and snowballed and rolled in. Conveniently, here in Florida, Governor DeSantis announced that we were not doing the Florida State assessment anymore. No more FSAs. Well, a few years ago, Rick Scott declared that we were no longer doing the FCATs. Here's the thing. they replaced the FCAT with the FSA, which somehow managed to cost the taxpayers millions of more dollars, despite being computer-based, for the most part. Whatever they replace the FSA with, I guarantee you will cost more money per student to administer, will have a higher upkeep cost, and will, increase the portion of the education budget going to the standardized testing, which doesn't even hold relevance 90% of the time directly to what the student was learning, and it's usually a bad tool, because how are you going to evaluate an entire year's worth of learning on a singular test on one day? Name a single profession for me where your performance for the entire year is based on how somebody with low motivation, who may or may not have been present for the entire year, performs on a test on one day. On the teacher side, let alone on the student side, where the performance for the entire year is measured on one test on one day. And even with the adjustment to progress monitoring, it's not going to be a good capture. As much as I hate portfolios, you kind of have to take a holistic evaluation of where the students started and where the students have gone in order to get a realistic view of where they're at and where they've ended up. It's not something you can capture in a single, easy to compare test score on a normative test. There's just so many untested skills that they're picking up and they're acquiring, especially the younger students. And then with the older students as well, it's like, you're not going to be able to capture the fact that, they went from